Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín, otro día maravilloso aquí hoy. Tema de hoy es, en esta semana algunos de mis estudiantes están terminando con un curso conmigo después de algunas semanas. Yo creo es un buen tiempo para revisar o para, dice, como una qué pasó generalmente, cómo nosotros juntos regresando a su nivel de inglés y algunas observaciones en cómo funciona y en verdad cómo funcionan las clases y por qué yo creo esta forma de método funciona muy bien. So ese es el tema de hoy. So, hello again from Medellin. A really splendid afternoon today. Look, I mean, really terrific sunset we got coming on here. Been a lovely day. So, I thought today I'll just share with you some thoughts about language learning generally, but particularly I'm going to relate this to how I've just been working with a couple of my students over the last several weeks. Some of them have just finished their run of courses with me for the moment. So this is a good point because I've just been recapping with them how they've made progress, where they've improved. So it's a good idea, I think, now to just recap some of that with you in general terms, look at how we got them to that point and how useful that's been. So, okay, so my students come to me at a fairly similar level. They're probably what I would class as like an intermediate level to begin with. And in both cases, they're looking to improve their English, particularly because they're about to face interviews in English. So this is really around their job. So initially, we had a conversation just to see, okay, well, what do you know already? How confident are you? And tell me a bit more about you. So this gives me a chance as their teacher really to listen to see if there's anything like mechanical problems, if you like. There's some sounds I have real problems with, or there are other words they're getting really badly pronounced, those kind of things. Once we get past some of that, and okay, some of my students we've had to go back and really unpack some of those words, so sometimes it's necessary to be aware that the way you're saying those sounds, that's really not clear. It's making other words you're saying unclear. So that's the time to go back and do some more specific work on some of the sounds or sound combinations. But once you pass that, then it's more about really vocabulary. And that's where it gets interesting, because clearly everyone wants to be fluent. That's fair enough. But to achieve that really, you need to do an awful lot of reading. Because even as an adult, like native speaker, for us to be able to speak truly, fairly fluently, or at least be able to answer or ask useful questions on most topics we come across, or to read most types of books we can find without too much difficulty, we need a very large working vocabulary. That's something that takes us a long while to get. But in truth, unless you're going to become a professor of literature or something like that at a university, or you're going to work professionally in writing like as a journalist, you probably don't really need such a large working vocabulary, at least at the beginning. And this is what I've been working with my students. So my second question is, okay, let's find out why do you need to improve your English? What are you going to use it for? So in their case, this was both to improve for prospective job interviews. That makes our task a little easier, because now we can focus down on, okay, let's look at your CV, your job history, let's work through that so we can talk about that. Let's work through so we can introduce you, or you can introduce yourself to prospective clients or to interviewers who are asking you questions, some things about you and about your working life, your work experience, what you're good at, what you're not good at, these kind of things. So that immediately reduces our necessary vocabulary quite a bit. So we're focusing down just on that. Once we looked at those two aspects of it, we could then look at what type of jobs they're looking to work in, what kind of employment fields. We can look at some technical vocabulary they might need to cover. Maybe there's some key readings in that particular area that they need to know about. What's the current trend in that industry? These kind of things, bits to understand the vocabulary. Good points, bad points about maybe some new technical innovations in that industry. So again, that's a bit of specialist vocabulary for that particular type of job. So we've covered how to talk about themselves, how to talk about their career experience, and how to talk about the career field they're looking to work in. Then we go at this in more of like a question-answer type approach. So what kind of questions would you get at the interview? This is a really good way of widening out your vocabulary, because often you could be asked multiple questions, whereas really there's only one or two answers to that particular range of questions. Maybe the interviewer could ask you nearly the same thing 5 or 6 different ways, perhaps, maybe more. But really it comes down to, well, in that case I still have to only answer this type of question with this information. So again, some of your answers can be using quite a small amount of vocabulary, which makes it easier for you to prepare. So you can try and prepare for as many likely questions as you're going to get in things like an interview. And every time we're doing that, we're improving our vocabulary by what type of questions we're going to be asked. And of course, we're constantly practicing how we give our answers. And all the while we're doing this, my task as their teacher in this sense is to listen carefully to how they're saying what they're saying and help them by modelling, showing examples, reading with them, listening carefully to how they're saying it and showing them different ways to do that, is to give them confidence that they can control their voice, speak with good modulation, so their voice is nice and expressive, and we get them much closer to a native speaker sound. That's not to say we're necessarily going to remove all their accent, but that's not really the idea. So like I said yesterday, a lot of this is more to do with, can you speak in a similar rhythm and with similar modulation? So the same type of intonation, same type of stress on word patterns as native speakers do, because now you're starting to sound more like one of them. So using that as a way forward, make them conscious of, look, you said this sentence like this. If you say it like this with these pauses or with this type of modulation, hear the difference. Look at what you express better by saying it like this, and then model that, practice that a bit more. Again, use different questions. Start looking at some unusual vocabulary they might come across, particularly in the questions, things like idiomatic language, expressions that are very hard to translate but we use commonly. And then by repeating that and doing a lot of reading of texts that are useful to that particular job industry, we get them much more familiar with the sounds of all the vocabulary that they're commonly going to use in that scenario, which is the job interview or that particular job type. So that's really the trick in a shorter time frame. So in a shorter time frame, a couple of months, you can reasonably well prepare for that type of conversation with confidence and feel happy you could talk about, let's say, your job for some time at some level of detail without too much stress. Now obviously without practicing other areas, you're going to need to practice for specific dialogues, and that's why I've been saying before, think carefully about what you want to use the language for. What's the most urgent thing? Because if you're only going to use this to go do shopping or go on holiday, then practice that kind of vocabulary. Let's practice what you need to say when you go shopping. What kind of things you want to buy, ask for discounts, negotiate prices. If you're going on holiday or traveling, let's look at things like airports, ask directions, talk to taxi drivers, this kind of thing. But if it's for your job, well, that might involve some technical vocabulary, but in some ways that might be an easier conversation because they start becoming more predictable. People are going to ask you similar questions because your job usually contains a fair number of repeated tasks that you can then predict questions people are going to ask you about. So that's the way to look at it, and that's how I've done with some success with my recent students now. It's to focus on, be very specific about what you really need this language for in the short term, be realistic about your level of competency you're going to reach, but equally, once you've gained mastery in that particular area, recognize that now you're bringing a lot more skill, particularly in terms of control of your voice, how you sound, and your reading ability, which is a very easy transferable skill to bring into other areas, like, okay, so now I'm going to prepare for my trip, so I need to practice all my vocabulary for airports, taxis, transport generally. But now, because you're already much more confident in how you sound generally, you've done all the introduction type stuff, you know how to talk about your job, no problem. Lots of those phrases have carryover into other themes. That's like bit by bit from there. So there we go. That's a brief summary of kind of the way I structure the work I do with my students. And also that's kind of the way I'm approaching trying to improve my Spanish, is to look at it more like on a topic by topic basis. And I'm realistic that I'm going to get better in some areas before I improve in others. And literature, like works of Cervantes, tragically, will still be beyond me for some time. But that doesn't mean I can't enjoy the Spanish language as it is, as I encounter it day on day. So there we go, some thoughts on that. I hope you find those ones useful. Déjenme saber, como siempre, en los comentarios. But for now, for a really fantastic evening here in Medellin, we'll say cheerio.